In the early months of 2008, in the city of Newcastle in the north of England, a man was clearing out a lock-up garage that had belonged to his late uncle. The garage had been closed for a very long time. Inside, under a heavy layer of dust, beneath stacked boxes and the ordinary debris of a private life, there was the shape of a car. Low, long, with a curved and unmistakable silhouette. What that man had found in an ordinary garage in an ordinary street was a car that the most serious collectors in the world had been quietly wondering about for half a century. It was a Bugatti, and not just any Bugatti. This is the story of how one of the rarest cars on Earth spent 50 years hidden in plain sight. To understand why this discovery mattered so much, you have to understand what the car actually was. In the 1930s, the French manufacturer Bugatti occupied a position in the automotive world that is difficult to describe today. A Bugatti was not simply a fast or expensive car. It was regarded as something closer to a piece of engineering art, a machine where mechanical function and visual beauty were pursued with equal seriousness and equal obsession. And at the very top of Bugatti's 1930s range was the Type 57S. The Type 57S was the high-performance version of Bugatti's Type 57, lowered, lightened, and built for genuine speed. It carried a 3.3-liter straight-8 engine, 8 cylinders in a single line, and in supercharged form, it could produce over 200 horsepower, a remarkable figure for the 1930s, enough to push the car beyond 120 miles per hour at a time when an ordinary car struggled to reach 50. But the Type 57S was not only about speed. The most desirable examples wore a body style called the Atalante, a flowing, teardrop-shaped coupe designed under the direction of Jean Bugatti, the founder's gifted son. The Atalante is, to this day, considered one of the most beautiful shapes ever put onto a motor car. And it was rare. Bugatti built only 43 examples of the Type 57S in total. Of those, only 17 were given the in-house Atalante coupe coachwork. 17. In a world where the great pre-war Bugattis are tracked, cataloged, and accounted for almost like old master paintings, 17 is a very small number. And every single one of those cars has a history that collectors can, in principle, trace. Except that one of them had effectively disappeared. The specific car in this story carries the chassis number 57502. It was completed at the Bugatti Works on the 5th of May, 1937, and its first owner was not an anonymous wealthy buyer. It was Francis Curzon, the 5th Earl Howe, one of the most significant figures in British motorsport of that entire era. Earl Howe was a genuine racing driver, not merely a titled enthusiast. He was the first president of the British Racing Drivers Club, and he had won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. When a man like Earl Howe ordered a Type 57S Atalante directly from Bugatti, that car began its life with about as distinguished a provenance as a pre-war automobile could possibly have. Earl Howe kept the Bugatti through the years surrounding the Second World War. It is believed the car was stored during the war itself, and afterward Howe used it again. In his role as president of the British Racing Drivers Club, he reportedly used this very car to formally open the first British motorsport event held after the war. But in 1945, following an accident, Earl Howe sold the Bugatti. And here the car began the long journey that would eventually lead it into the dark. After Howe, chassis 57502 passed through a series of owners, each a step further from the spotlight. It went through London motor dealers. In 1947, it was sold to a man named Tingay, who made an important modification. Original Bugatti superchargers were almost impossible to find so soon after the war, so a Marshall supercharger was fitted instead. In 1950, it passed to another owner, and by 1954, it had become part of the collection of Lord Ridley. And then, in 1955, the Bugatti was sold to the man who would define the rest of its story, Dr. Harold Carr. Harold Carr was an orthopedic surgeon. By the accounts that survive, he was a man of considerable intelligence and wide enthusiasms, interested in machinery, in aviation, in the mechanical world. He bought the Bugatti, and for the first few years he used it. He drove the car. For a brief period in the 1950s, chassis 57502 was simply a man's car, on the road, being enjoyed. But Harold Carr was also, by nature, an intensely private man. In his later life, that privacy deepened into something more difficult. He became increasingly reclusive, and his instinct to keep and to hold things became more pronounced. And at some point in the early 1960s, Harold Carr put the Bugatti into his garage and closed the door. The car's last road tax disc expired in December 1960. From that point onward, chassis 57502 simply stopped. It was not sold. It was not advertised. It was not lent to a museum or shown at an event. It sat in a lock-up garage in Gosforth, an area of Newcastle upon Tyne, in the north of England. And it stayed there through the entire decade of the 1960s, through the 1970s, through the 1980s, through the 1990s, through the first years of the new century. For nearly 5 decades, one of the 17 Atalante coupés in existence sat in the dark, a few feet from an ordinary residential street, while almost no one in the world knew it was there. And here is what makes the story remarkable, rather than merely sad. During those same 5 decades, the world outside that garage was changing completely. In the 1960s, when Carr first parked the car, a pre-war Bugatti was a fine old machine, valued by enthusiasts, but not yet treated as a serious financial asset. Over the following decades, the classic car market transformed beyond recognition. The great pre-war Bugattis became some of the most valuable and most fiercely pursued automobiles on the planet. Collectors, auction houses, historians, and Bugatti specialists tracked the surviving cars obsessively. And throughout that entire transformation, the experts knew that one of the 17 Atalantes was unaccounted for. They knew chassis 57502 existed. They simply did not know where it was. It had become, in the quiet language of the collector world, a lost car. Harold Carr died in 2007. He had never, it seems, told the wider world what was in his garage. The car passed, as part of his estate, to his heirs, and there were 8 of them. And in 2008, as the practical business of settling that estate went forward, Carr's nephew began the ordinary task of clearing out his late uncle's lock-up garage. That is the moment the story turns. Not a treasure hunt, not an expert following a lead, just a family member clearing a dusty garage who pulled back the boxes and the debris and found himself looking at the shape of a Bugatti. The auction house Bonhams was brought in, and what their specialists confirmed was extraordinary. This was indeed chassis 57502, the lost Atalante. And it was not merely intact, it was, in the words used at the time, a genuine time capsule. The car had not been restored. It had not been modified or modernized or improved during its 5 decades of silence. It had simply been left, exactly as it was, slowly gathering dust. Its engine had not been started in around 50 years. For a certain kind of collector, this was almost more valuable than a perfect restoration could ever be, because a restored car is, in part, a modern recreation, while this was the real thing, untouched, carrying every honest mark of its actual history. The originality that only deep neglect can produce had, paradoxically, preserved something priceless. News of the discovery broke at the very start of 2009, and it traveled around the world, not just in the specialist motoring press, but in mainstream newspapers and television. The story had everything: a lost masterpiece, an eccentric and reclusive owner, a dusty garage, an aristocratic racing driver provenance, and a likely price measured in millions. Bonhams made the Bugatti the centerpiece of their February 2009 sale, held at the Rétromobile classic car show in Paris. Estimates flew about wildly in the press. Some speculated the car might reach £6 million and become one of the most expensive cars ever sold at auction. On the 7th of February 2009, in a sale room in Paris packed with well over 1,000 people, chassis 57502 crossed the block. The bidding was determined and international. In the end, the car did not quite reach the most extravagant predictions. It fell just short of its £3 million reserve and was sold for a figure of just under £3 million, which, with the auction house's premium, came to around $4.4 million. It was the top sale of the entire auction. A car that had been bought by a surgeon in 1955, parked around 1960, and left untouched for nearly 50 years, had emerged from a Newcastle garage to become, for a moment, one of the most famous automobiles in the world. It is worth sitting with what actually happened here, because it is easy to file this away simply as a lucky find, a happy accident, a windfall for the Carr family. But that framing misses the real point. The Bugatti did not survive 5 decades by accident. It survived because of a person. Harold Carr, whatever his reasons, and his reasons were likely tangled up with a private and difficult relationship to the things he owned, did one thing with absolute consistency for nearly 50 years. He kept the car still. He did not drive it into the ground. He did not sell it in a weak market. He did not have it badly restored by the standards of some passing decade. He did not modify it to suit changing fashion. He simply held it in the dark and let nothing happen to it at all. We tend to assume that the great surviving artifacts of history are protected by institutions, by museums, by collections, by experts who understand their value and act deliberately to preserve them. And sometimes that is true, but far more often, the thing that survives does so because of a single private individual who, for reasons entirely their own, decided to hold on. The pristine condition of chassis 57502 was not the achievement of any expert. It was the byproduct of one reclusive man's instinct to keep and not to let go. His privacy, which was in many ways a burden in his life, became the very thing that delivered an untouched masterpiece to the future. There is one more layer to this. The collector world had spent decades actively searching for this exact car, tracking it, wondering about it, treating its absence as a genuine mystery. And all that searching achieved nothing. The car was not found by the people looking for it. It was found because its owner died, and an ordinary family obligation, the clearing of a garage, finally opened the door that decades of expert curiosity could not. The thing that hides an object from the world, and the thing that finally reveals it, are often both completely indifferent to how badly the world wants it. The Bugatti surfaced on its own schedule, not the market's. The greatest barn find of its generation was not an accident of luck. It was the work of a single man who, deliberately or not, removed a masterpiece from the world and kept it perfectly still. We imagine that great cars survive because they are protected by institutions, museums, experts. More often, They survive because one private person simply decided to hold on and said nothing. Preservation, in the end, is usually just silence, kept long enough to become history.